Good morning, everybody. Welcome in, and thank you for taking the time to be here to learn. We're going to do a little bit of learning in this different format, where we do a little bit of questions and answers rather than direct learning out of the Makora. So we're actually going to be doing Torah in real life as we go together. I want to start off by thanking Baruch and Esther Weinstein for sponsoring our learning and our continued appreciation of halacha in practice today. For the Yortzat, the first Yortzat of Baruch's father, Mordechai ben Chaim, Mordi Weinstein, whose Yortzat is actually today in Nazir Simei Tshuva. And we in this show have very fond memories of Mordi Weinstein, especially those on the tennis court. Have an especially fond memory of him. Mordi actually grew up in East New York and attended Torah's Chaim, which makes a lot of sense because that's where Baruch went to and where Ben went to as well. So it's a three-generation. No, Ben didn't go to, and he went to Torah's I'll show the bit of it. Okay, fine. So he almost went to the Baruch Hashem and Baruch's been very involved in Torah's Chaim, even beyond. And Mordi served in the U.S. Army as a chaplain during the Korean War. They didn't see action. He spent time in Fort Dix, in New Jersey, Fort Carlson in Colorado. He was actually achieved the level of marksman when he was in the Army as well. He spent 30 years in Philip Brothers and in commodities training run by German Jews, and he was able to achieve a very important status of having 3 hours wait between meat and dairy, which was very, very important and an especially important reason why Esther agreed to marry Baruch. He had a very
among other
many wonderful reasons. He had a very tough life in certain ways, although you would never have guessed it. He lost his first wife when he was only 55, and his second wife had a stroke, and he spent 19 years looking after her with incredible dignity and honor. He also lost a son at a very young age, and nonetheless, you would never have guessed it, as he was an incredibly gentle, thoughtful, kind person. He played singles tennis until he was 80 years old, and it was a tradition continued by his son and Mishpacha Mitzvah Shem. He also has a legacy of over 38 grandchildren, great-grandchildren, B'chein Yirbu, and they may grow Mitzvah Shem Nishmasai Eden today. Thank you, Baruch, for making this the context for our opportunity of learning. We are very excited to be inviting in Rabbi Zomick today. I don't think most people realize how much of their life revolves around Rabbi Zomick without even knowing it. And that is Rabbi Zomick is the rabbinic authority in charge of the day-to-day maintenance and oversight of the 5 towns Eruv, which means to say every time you walk out of your house on a Shabbos, you, without knowing it, are relying on Rabbi Zomick's incredible care and his humility. Rabbi Zomick grew up here in the 5 towns. He went to Beis Yisrael and returned and spent 14 years learning Yeshiva Gedolah of the 5 towns. He received his general smicha from Rabbi Noble, and specifically in the halachas and mechitzos in Eruv from Rabbi Kresh. Rabbi Isaac Kresh, who now is a kollel for Rockaway. He used to be a great nick. He became involved in the 5 towns Eruv in 2007, became the rabbinic manager a few years later. He currently manages, besides the 5 town Eruv, he manages 9 other community Eruv on a regular basis. He has expertise in the halachas and practical application of the building design and management of the community Eruvin, and he has been hired by many tri-state Eruvs and beyond for inspections, audits, designing, including Passaic, Toms River, Henderson, Nevada, Richardson, Texas, and was involved in building the Eruv in Sunnyside, Queens, and Bridgeport, Connecticut. So you have to understand this is a very specific, unique set of skills, because it involves a lot of different sets of skills. It involves an incredible knowledge of halacha and engineering and public policy and dealing with community politics all in one, as halacha meets the tarmac. Thank you for. Rabbi does not appreciate the public eye, and so I thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So Rabbi Zomick, just tell me a little bit. How did you get involved in the Eruv? Like, how did that in 2007? How did you become a person who's learning in kollel and suddenly get involved in the Eruv?
So it was a little bit by accident. Kind of just fell into my lap, you would say. But I was there only a few years learning in kollel, and there was behind the scenes, nothing I had anything to do with, but there was a movement to upgrade, to work on the 5 towns Eruv. They called in an official chapter, Shlita, to come and give advice and see the Eruv. I was not involved in that process. I wish I was. would love to hear in person what he said, but he gave a list of instructions and rules, guidance to be followed, and at that time, there were very few people involved in the Eruv. I think they really fell on the shoulders of one very big tzaddik who was trying his best, and so they asked the yeshiva to help. And the first thing they really asked for was just to help to supply some checkers, because checking the Eruv on a weekly basis is a massive task. It's a huge Eruv, and so the yeshiva asked for some volunteers, and I did. And I had the schus of going around to see the Eruv with Rabbi Ya'akov Trump. He mentions Nauer Shkol and Farakwe. He's considered one of the biggest experts in the Eruv, probably in the world, certainly in the United States. And so a handful of us, I would say 5 to 7 guys, we went around with him. He showed us different sections of the Eruv. He showed us what Shachter's instructions were. We're trying to help the community work on that Eruv. And I was just absolutely fascinated by the halachas, how they apply practically. You know, it just took me, I guess you could say, and so I spent maybe more time than everyone else talking to Rav Crash, and I decided to sit down and learn the sugyas inside and learn the halachas, and one thing led to another. What really happened was that this community used to rely on, the number I've heard is 23 tri-state Eruvin were using, up until about 20 years ago, a sign guy who just many years ago was brought in to do the repairs for all the different community. There had been a guy with a bucket truck who was a well-meaning, nice guy. I don't think he was Jewish, but he was busy. And one of the very frustrating things was we would walk around one week and see a part of the Eruv, and then we would give our recommendations, and they wouldn't get fixed. He was too busy. He didn't get out there. He didn't make it. So me and a friend, we were in Kol 3 Siddharim a day, so we didn't have much time, but we got up 4 o'clock in the morning every morning, threw a ladder on a minivan, and I guess we knew how to use tools a little bit, and then we just started making the repairs ourselves. And that kind of spawned into, eventually we realized we couldn't just do this with a ladder and a minivan. We raised some money and bought a very used old bucket truck, which has long since been deceased, but we continued the repairs. He ended up moving away, so it fell really on me, but ultimately it just made sense. Community switched over to really using me officially for the repairs and the maintenance. We grew the checking, the amount of people from yeshiva checking grew to about 20, and slowly, through that work, through work on other communities, through a lot of shimish with Rabbi Ya'akov Trump and other poskim, that's really how I got involved.
Unbelievable. Folks, I just want to understand what that means. Is that here we are on a regular Shabbos, walking out our house, and realizing that somebody else whose job it wasn't at the time was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning because that's the mission in Avos says, "B'makom she'ein anashim ishtadel liyos ish," and it doesn't say "B'makom she'ein ish." It says "B'makom she'ein anashim." There's usually a lot of people who need to be doing something which isn't being done, and somebody has to step in. That's really incredible to appreciate. Actually, I'm very close to Rav Mordechai Peretsky. So he was involved in a lot of Eruv, and that's the same thing. He was involved in Edison, the same thing happened. It's just no one was doing anything. And so he said, I'm going to do this, and he got his own bucket truck and started from there. But that's how it starts. When I was in Smicha, we went through Hilchos Eruvin with Rav Shechter. So he used to take us on an Eruv tour of Washington Heights, but they used to make sure that he always did the tour on Mondays. Because every year he did it, but every year there were problems. So they needed the whole week to make sure they could fix all the things he saw in the Eruv. And every year there was an issue, right? And so the Rabbi Mashir, who was in charge, would walk with us just to take notes of what the issues were that year, because there's so many issues that come up.
When a community calls me for an audit or an inspection, sometimes they'll ask someone to come in and see the whole thing once a year. I always say Sunday. Same exact reason.
You need a week.
We're gonna find 10 things. We got time. We need time to take care of it.
So Thursday afternoons is not the time to figure out the Eruv. Baruch Hashem, a lot goes into this. Let's take a step backwards. I was once in Boston, and I was in Haymarket Square. We're just minding our own business. We were tourists for a day or two, and this lady comes up to me and says, "I see you're Jewish." I was like, "Okay, what have we got?" So she says, we were taking a tour in downtown Manhattan the other day, and there was this thing called this Eruv. And she said, they showed me this it's a line, and I was wondering, to me it seems like it's it's a line of faith. That's what it is, right, Rabbi? So I explained to her, and I did a pretty good job, I think, in 2 minutes to explain the complexities of Surah Pesach and so on, all these things. And then she says, So it's a line of faith, Rabbi. And I think people just don't understand what this means.
Yes.
They think it's a little bit of a game. You have Jews looking up at telephone poles. Like, what in the world? Can you just give us a little bit of background, just like the general idea? Most people, Eruv does not refer to a telephone pole. Like, how does this work?
Sure. My biggest pet peeve is when people refer to it as a loophole. It's certainly not a loophole. The short story is that that in order to carry, push, move items on Shabbos, we know that you have to be in a Rosh Hashanah. There are Arba Rishis Shabbos. There's 4 different types of domains categorized in Mesachas Eruvin and Shabbos, and a Rosh Hashanah, which is we'll just say strictly defined midrabanan as completely enclosed area, is required for carrying on Shabbos. You have to be within a Rosh Hashanah house or an enclosed backyard with fences. These are understandable Rishuyas Hayachid. They're completely enclosed. We understand what that means.
Just interrupt for a second. And your front yard in an American situation
Would depend on if it's enclosed with a fence.
The average.
It does not have to. We call it Rishuyas Hayachid, but it's not. It doesn't. It's not really dependent on property ownership. It's dependent on the structure of the Rishus. If the Rishus is completely enclosed by mechitzas, that's Rishus Hayachid. So the Eruv, what we call the Eruv, it's a little bit of a misnomer, but what we all refer to as the Eruv is really a giant structure that surrounds an entire community, half a community, multiple communities, with walls, mechitzas lahalacha, and renders the entire makom Rosh Hashanah. That's what we're doing. It's very far from a loophole. In fact, Minat Torah, one would be allowed to carry even if it wasn't Rosh Hashanah, even if it was a Carmelist, but Chazal required it to be Rosh Hashanah, and they make very, very specific instructions on how that should be constructed. What constitutes a mechitza, what constitutes a fence, la'alacha, is very, very specific. And one of the aspects of any enclosure, the Chazal understood, it's not a derabanan, it's minat Torah, is something called the Tzuras Pesach, or we would call it doorway. A doorway has the status of a mechitza in halacha, being as it is part of most enclosures have an entranceway and exit way to enter, exit. So Chazal, so minat Torah, the Tzuras Pesach or doorway, if it's constructed correctly, which Chazal say is kana mikan, bekana al gabeim, you have to have 2 mezuzahs, you have to have a lintel that runs directly on top of the mezuzahs, and when you have a Tzuras Pesach, that has the status of a mechitza la'alacha. So what people talk about, when people are looking at telephone poles, they are really usually a small or sometimes large part of a very big structure that surrounds the entire community. That's made up of fences, buildings, sometimes slopes of hills that are the right slope la'alacha, but there's an enormous amount of things that make up this big continuous enclosure around the community, and one of them is Tzuras Pesach. And telephone poles are utilized for the Tzuras Pesach. Sometimes telephone poles, if the power lines are situated properly, they can serve themselves as a Tzuras Pesach without any repairs or tikkunim needed. Most often not, and we have to put up our own wires and our own poles to create these Tzuras Pesach, and the telephone poles are just a good practical way many times of doing that, because it's kind of hard to just stick poles and wires around the community. But Baruch Hashem, we have these utility poles that are often found in many areas of the community, and they enable us to attach what we need to attach to create these Tzuras Pesach. But it's a part of a very large structure. The Eruv in the 5 towns, I would say, is probably about 50% Tzuras Pesach, but then it's another 50% that is made up of fences and buildings, houses, structures that create this big hekif around the community to render Rosh Hashanah.
Unbelievable. So then just to get a sense of what is the scope of the 5 towns Eruv, just our local Eruv, like how much area is covered by our Eruv?
People ask me this question, so I've looked it up before. Roughly 8 square miles, the 5 towns Eruv. It's the length of the actual Eruv, the circumference, I think you would call it, is about almost 16 miles of Eruv, of fences and of poles, of structures that we maintain. That's just the 5 towns Eruv. There are also many other Eruv connected to the 5 towns Eruv. I happen to also be in charge now of managing the Farakwe Eruv, the Inland Eruv. Wow. So there's the Yulid Eruv, the Valley Stream Eruv. There are a lot of Eruvin. The 5 towns Eruv, which is the biggest of them all and encompasses most of the 5 towns, that's about 16 miles. But there's many more.
Unbelievable. So let's just dig in there for just a second. So why, let's say that you have all these areas right next to each other. Why would you not just have one large area? What's the problem of having like just one, like you cut out a whole bunch of middle fences then? So what's the issue with that?
So there isn't an issue per se. A lot of it's historical. For many, many years, the five towns maintained one Eruv. Yulit maintained another Eruv. Farakwe had their own Eruv. And the reason why it became like that is because the Eruv is a big financial responsibility. It requires fundraising to upkeep it. It requires paying checkers weekly to inspect it. It requires paying the repairman to fix it. It requires the Rav to come and see annually or biannually the whole thing and make sure everything's in order. There's a lot of things involved. There's insurance. There's truck costs for the five towns. So, you know, every shul, or in the case of the five towns, I think it was actually three shuls mainly for years that supported was Young Israel of Lawrence-Cedarhurst Special and Young Israel of Woodmere were the big founders of the Eruv. They supported and they financed what they could for their neighborhood. So for Rockaway did their neighborhood, the five towns did their neighborhood, Yulit, Valley Stream, etc. Ultimately, the five towns Eruv now in its current form, which is made up of a conglomerate of all the shuls as a board that has a member, I think, from most big shuls in the area. They took over maintenance of almost all of them. Farakwe is still technically a separate Eruv, but now most of them fall under the umbrella of five towns Eruv. And the truth is that keeping those dividing lines between them is smart, because if there would ever be something that happened during Hurricane Sandy was the last time I remember a big event like this, but when Sandy hit and the Eruv were destroyed, we were working on it for weeks, it was very, very helpful to have those dividing lines. You didn't have to have the entire five towns of Rockaway all down immediately. We were able to repair this section, and then we were able to repair subsequently another section, and slowly we were able to get everyone back online. So it's important to keep them separate, and you know, since they were created that way, it makes sense to maintain them that way.
Yes, I remember we had a few years ago, we had a hurricane which affected some of the South Lawrence mikveh.
There was one
Eruv, and then
yes. Since Sandy, there was one other time when the Eruv was down. I don't think it was a named storm, but it was a big storm that happened on Erev Shabbos, and yeah, that was the last time that happened.
Right, but I remember at the time that because we were able to subdivide it, because we could actually cut off the area at Broadway, which made it a lot easier, just affected one section of the five towns area, so sort of like that bifurcation is very helpful.
That is true. That actually was erected in order to save most of the five towns area that week. That was not one of our existing or maintained divisions, but we saw that we were able to save most of the Eruv by running it down Broadway, so we did that over the night, Thursday night.
So you created a separate unit in order to say, just in
separate,
case, as you well, the five towns area came through at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. That was when the South Lawrence everything was actually fixed, but it was quite a moment of time. Baruch Hashem for the five towns. It was very close to actually having to remember the Hamelach of HaTzochah, folks. But let's just want to just talk a little bit about. You mentioned like there's a Rabbi Machshir. The Rabbi Machshir goes through annually or biannually to check the Eruv. Can you just explain the importance of the Rabbi Machshir, but then also the importance of the day-to-day upkeep? Like meaning like the importance of both of having both these pieces in place.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story about Rabbi. I mean, Rabbi Machshir is very important, like you said, and that's because obviously Eruv the Hilchos Eruv are very, very complex. There's lots of different shittas and a lot of machlokes when it comes to the proper construction for an Eruv, and so it's important for every community to have a Rav who's an expert in Hilchos Eruv to turn to when you have your big shilas, when something comes up, and like you said, it's important to have a thorough, let's say, annual inspection at least of a community Eruv by a Rav Machshir, by someone who's an absolute expert, in order to ensure that that everything is still in good condition, because the Eruv changes constantly. I won't say weekly anymore, but very, very often something happens. They have to make a small fix, reroute the Eruv here, reroute the Eruv there, and so things change over the course of time. There's expansions. It's important to have the Rabbi Machshir in place for that reason. At the same time, the Rabbi Machshir is not, in essence, it's maybe not the correct term if you ask me. He's not really the Rabbi Machshir. He can't be, because he's not weekly seeing what happens on the Eruv, and so really the Rabbi Machshir is the person or the people who are involved on a weekly basis who are making the decisions every single week how to fix this problem that happened this week, how to reroute the Eruv when construction is in the way, some people need an expansion in this area of the neighborhood. We think those are the people who are involved, and hopefully that they're responsible and they're good people. They're obviously consulting with the Rabbi Machshir, but it's hard for the Rabbi Machshir to see an Eruv every week, so to take responsibility for it is very difficult. If you speak to most Rabbanim who are labeled as the Rabbi Machshir for an Eruv, they'll tell you when you call them. I can't tell you whether the Eruv is kosher because the last time I saw was a year ago, but I can tell you that they do a great job, or whatever he can tell you. But I was recently speaking with the son of Rav Shimon Eider Zatzal. Rav Shimon Eider was famous for being one of the first pioneers to go around and do the guidance of Rav Moshe and then on his own and set up Eruvin around the tri-state area. And his son told me that his father was lamenting to him many, many years later that he would go to communities and they would say, oh, you're the Rabbi Machshir of my Eruv and our Eruv is kosher because of you. And he said, what are you talking about? I haven't been to this community in 20 years. I helped you set up the Eruv, but I don't know what it looks like anymore. So it's important to understand that the Rabbi Machshir plays a vital role, but the people who are in charge of maintaining it every week play just as much of a vital role in the kashrus of the Eruv.
I didn't appreciate this fully, and I was just hanging out with Rabbi Peresky. We were in Yeshiva together like a few months ago, and he was talking to me about how he makes a spreadsheet of every single poll in the Eruv because changes happen so often. Can you just give me an example of those kind of changes? What are the kind of things that happen on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis that relate to the fact that it has to have upkeep all the time?
There are so many different things that happen. I will say that every Eruv is very different. The 5 towns of Eruv happens to be, I've seen many Eruv in the United States. And the 5 towns of Eruv is unique. They're all unique, but the 5 towns of Eruv is very unique because of just the different types of areas that we work in. We have the Eruv runs through Woodsburg and back Lawrence, which is their own animal. There are no telephone poles there. You're dealing with private properties, sometimes very big properties with lots of trees and overgrowth and landscaping and maintenance. That's one, aspect of our Eruv. Then we have, very busy, high traffic areas like Peninsula Boulevard and Rockaway Turnpike and 878, and there are and everything in between. And so we have waterfront communities. So there are constantly things that happen, whether it is construction, whether it's automobile accidents, whether it's vandalism we've had, whether it's just basic landscaping and tree growth and homeowner construction. Things are constantly taking down the Eruv or invalidating the Eruv, causing us to move the Eruv a little here, a little there. And so that's because of all the different things that happen, and because it's so large. So you're talking about 16 miles. So on any given weeks, for something to take place along one of those stretches is not uncommon. And Rabbi Peresky is right. This happens in all Eruv, and I think in the 5 towns we have maybe even a more unique situation because of how large it is here.
I know when I lived in Bell Harbor, we had a committee, an Eruv committee. And sometimes my husband would get a phone call very early in the morning, somebody can't do it, would you do it instead? So that I know is volunteers, the checking. But what about this neighborhood has a shul on every corner? Do they pay also for Eruv?
Baruch Hashem, I'm not in charge of the fundraising. I think that would be too much for me, but my understanding, I work with a very big tzaddik, a fellow named Elliot Waldman, who completely, as a chesed to the community, does not get paid for his time, but he takes upon himself to fundraise and manage all the finances for the year. We have like a $100,000 budget a year annually. And my understanding, the way that he reorganized it, because they did reorganize it back in 2014, I believe the idea is that every shul in the community is responsible based on their membership.
All right.
A certain amount of money per year, and the Eruv then approaches the shul and to collect the annual dues. And each shul, I assume, collects their funds differently. There's different methods of doing it, whether it's appeals or personal letters or whatever they do. But the Eruv is really turning to the shuls in the community, the yeshivas in the community, and based on membership, asking them to contribute to help us reach the budget.
It used to be, as Zomick said, that it used to be Young Israel of Lawrence-Cedarhurst and Shalom really were the shuls that underwrote the Eruv. So the big shuls and the people in the community, Baruch Hashem, were the ones paying for the entire communal service. We've had to shift that model because it's not fair that you have these shtiblach, who are just benefiting with not paying their way. And so Baruch Hashem, Rav Eli's done an incredible job. I want to just ask you, like, just to give you a sense of the maintenance. How many people are spending time on a weekly basis, like going out and doing this? Like,
So we're very blessed over here. One of the biggest budget items in most of the Eruv are the weekly checkers. There are some communities, like you said, Bell Harbor, that have volunteers, but it's rare nowadays. It's even though people think of it maybe as an easy thing, you go out once a week, you check the Eruv, but the truth is it requires a lot of commitment, because it doesn't matter if it's snowing, raining, boiling hot, a hurricane. Either way, they got to go out. Erev Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Tov, Erev Shabbos, all the times no one wants to be out. So most communities have to pay for the checkers a weekly fee, and that's a big part of the budget. In the 5 towns, we do have some areas that we do have to pay checkers for, but the vast majority of the 5 towns Eruv is checked b'chesed from the Bakram and the Young Israel of 5 towns. They still donate their time. We've actually approached them and asked them if they need money. The Rosh Yeshiva is adamant that he wants it to be a chesed project for the yeshiva, and so we have about 20 or so boys from yeshiva, men and boys from yeshiva who volunteer their time and go out. They split up into groups. We have a rotating system so that they're not checking the same section every week. They rotate around 10 different sections. We divide the Eruv up into. Each one takes approximately an hour, give or take, and they split into groups of 2, I believe, and rotate so the vast majority of the 5 towns Eruv is checked by people donating their time to Yeshiva the 5 towns.
unbelievable. I don't know if anybody just realized that. That's an incredible piece of information. We should be in great debt to the yeshiva for.
I want to add, we're in great debt, and also it increases the quality of the checkers like immensely, because most communities cannot afford to pay 20 people every week to pay the event, so you're really giving a much bigger chunk of work to a much smaller pool of people. This enables us to have an excellent group of checkers who all are doing it because they want to do it and they want to make sure the Eruv is kosher, and rotating 20 people around the Eruv every week ensures just a higher quality of checkers.
You
It's
should
Yeshiva
have
of
gone
the 5 towns.
Well, Yeshiva Gedol.
Which one?
You should have gone to the 5 towns. It's an incredible thing just to think about that. What a unique situation we have.
I don't know.
So I just wanted to go into a little issue that actually occurred just recently in the last 2 weeks. Rabbi Zomick and I were speaking. We were talking just 2 weeks ago about a situation that arose where it came to Rabbi Zomick's attention that a number of houses that were backed onto the golf course had taken down their back fence, right? And Rabbi Zomick dealt with the issue. I put him in touch with some of the neighbors who were living there. But it became clear that sometimes a number of people were removing their back fences, for whatever reason, or they'd fallen down. And so we sent out an email in the shul just for any of the property owners who are doing this or have a concern about this to reach out to Rabbi Zomick. Can you just explain like the issue so people don't understand golf courses and how this works in relationship to the Eruv?
Sure. So the short version is as follows. Even though what's required in order to carry on Shabbos is a Rosh Hashanah, like we spoke about before, an enclosed area, not all Rosh Hashanah are created equal in the eyes of Chazal. And they require not only that the area be enclosed, but that the area be enclosed for the purposes of dwelling and living, what we call mukaf lidira. So there are different types of issues. You can have an enclosed area like a factory or a storage lot, and that's not an area that's enclosed for the purposes of dira. When it comes to such areas, there is a size limitation. Chazal forbade carrying in such a Rosh Hashanah if it's more than a base of Sayim, which is 70 amas by 70 amas, not such a large area. I forgot the square footage of it, maybe between 15,000 and 18,000 square feet, approximately. So when you have an area that is not mukaf l'dira, you can't carry there either. These halachas are complex, but the short version is that many different types of areas, when they are part of a greater enclosure for an entire city where people are living, and there is dwelling and there is dira, they get subsumed in the Eruv, and they're considered mukaf l'dira, even though those particular areas are not places where people are living currently. However, Chazal outlined 2 very specific types of areas that they said are impossible to live in. They're areas unfit for living, and therefore they cannot be included in an enclosure that we would allow carrying on Shabbos. They can never be made roy l'dira. They can never be made enclosures that are for the purposes of living. Those 2 areas are mayim achurim, dirty water that's not potable, that's not usable for bathing, drinking, washing clothes, and zrayim, overgrowth overgrown areas. It's a very big shadow. What Zroya means, does it mean farmland? Does it mean just any overgrowth? But all these things are dealt with in the poskim. The bottom line is, Mayim Zerayim can't be included in an Eruv if it's a certain size, it's a basis sign. So the Woodmere Golf Course, when, I don't remember anymore, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when we made the expansion to include Railroad Avenue, and for those of you who know, that's the street that connects Woodsburg to back Lawrence. For many, many years, that was never included in the Eruv. In fact, before I came on, most of Woodsburg wasn't included in the Eruv, and lots of back Lawrence wasn't included in the Eruv. But over the years, we made a lot of expansions. Now all of Woodsburg is in the Eruv, Baruch Hashem, and much of back Lawrence is. So that street was a very vital one, and we worked for many years to get that put inside the Eruv to allow people to be able to walk back and forth between Woodsburg and back Lawrence. But one of the big complications was that the Woodmere Country Club had very big water traps on the golf course that were considered mayim achurim. They were salty or dirty water. They had some areas of vegetation that were very large and overgrown, and it couldn't be included in the Eruv. Ultimately, we worked out that we have an enclosure, two separate enclosures, basically. The community Eruv is on the left side of Railroad Avenue, creating the big enclosure around our whole community, and on the right side we have another enclosure to exclude the Woodmere Country Club from the Eruv proper, for this reason, because what we call a karfet, we can't have mayim or zorim included in the Eruv. So, that enclosure that surrounds the Woodmere Country Club is made up of fencing, it's made up of Zerus Pesach, a lot of different things. One of the things that it uses along much of the houses that run behind our back and Locust and Ivy and those streets back there is a big giant chain link fence that was maintained and put up by the Woodmere Country Club. Most of it is still there. I guess recently with the development, which I don't know where it's holding, but recently with the new developers bought the Woodmere Club and whatever their plans are of developing. So some homeowners who live on the golf course asked the course to remove their fencing because it's unsightly, it's big, it's ugly, and they're right, it is unsightly and big and ugly and overgrown, and they just had no idea that that fence really constituted part of this enclosure that kept the golf course separate from the Eruv. So, you know, Baruch Hashem, each situation is different over there. Sometimes if a homeowner removes their fence, that's not going to invalidate the rest of the Eruv because the houses are close enough together that we still have the houses to rely on as part of the Haggadah of the Eruv, and that was the situation in that case. But that was the basic idea.
And if let's say the fence is removed and it doesn't affect the whole Eruv, their backyard?
It would affect their backyards. It would mean that a person who removed the fence, let's say even if it didn't encroach on the Eruv proper, but they would not be able to carry in their backyard because their backyard would now be open to this area of Mayim Azraim.
Incredible. So just it's really easy to do this. You look on the 5 Towns Eruv website, you can see the entire map. It's very specific, and you'll see the entire Woodmere Club is surrounded by a red perimeter that's being excluded. It's like a bubble within the larger blue in circulation, which is the larger area as well. So just to be aware of this, and so now I'll be more sensitive as well whenever I go for a walk or a ride, I'm driving by or taking a bike ride along that road. If you look into people's backyards, you'll see there's a fence. That fence is part of the enclosure.
So the road that connects Woodsburg to back Lawrence, that road is in the area, or just that? But
it's included in the Eruv, but the golf course to the
golf
right
course
of it
itself
is excluded.
Correct.
Yeah, next time you go down Meadow, I think it is, and you look on the right by that little fence, there's actually an Eruv fence on the outside perimeter of the golf course excluded because that fence itself is not sufficient.
Woodmere Club.
Yeah, the Woodmere Club itself. Let's go a few other things because there's a little bit as well. Recently, this didn't affect our side of town, but just a few weeks ago, there was a situation on Branch Boulevard. Some construction was going on, and so this affected the connection between North Woodmere and Woodmere. But I remember at the time, if I'm not mistaken, that I think Nassau County reached out to the Eruv. Can you just tell us the relationship you have, like with like the local construction companies and the county, and how this affects the Eruv in this relationship?
They did. I was actually very surprised that they reached out, but you know, we have worked with Nassau County on a few different things over the years. We don't have reason to talk to them on a consistent basis. The last time I personally spoke to them would have been 10 or so years ago when we wanted to change the route of the Eruv through North Woodmere Park, and we had to reach out to them. They were very accommodating and very nice, so they're aware of the existence, but whoever it was, whether it was the engineer or the worker who was redoing the fencing along Branch Boulevard, saw the Eruv poles and realized it's part of the Eruv, and it was very, very nice of him he called up the Eruv, reached out and said, we're going to be doing this work. It turned out, that work was going to be taking place on Shavuos, and that's why we had to make preparations in advance. Usually, more often than not, what happens is construction, town of Hempstead, utility companies, whatever it is, they do work, but then when we inspect on Friday, we see what's wrong and we fix it. We kind of, that's the easiest way to keep track of things. Here, they gave us an advance notice, which was great because Shavuos was coming and we would not have been having any involvement with the Eruv in the middle of the week. But they told us that they were going to be taking down the fence, so that enabled us to go and build like a workaround of that area just for Yom Tov, to avoid that. We've had over the years a couple of interactions with utilities and the town that have been very, very positive. Whenever we have needed them, we reach out to them, but it isn't so often. It's good to have a great working relationship. I've been involved in communities that do not have great working relationships with the utilities or the town. I'm sure you've heard in the news stories about lawsuits and so on and so forth. We, Baruch Hashem, with the Nassau County and the utilities here have been very helpful. I'll tell you one story. Once they were redoing poles down a long stretch in Gibson, actually, part of the Five Towns Eruv. And we saw that PSE&G was doing work on a stretch, maybe it's about 20, 25 telephone poles down this block that was going to affect the Eruv on a week-to-week basis. So Ellie reached out just to say, the Eruv is there. We want to know, is there something, can you give us a schedule, a work schedule? And they said, sure, we're happy to work with you. And I said to Ellie, listen, I don't know if it's possible, you tell them that if they install their power lines directly over the tops of the poles, we won't need to put up stuff anywhere. And they were accommodating. They did the 25 poles. They said, sure. And they put the power lines on top of the poles, and it cut out a tremendous amount of work for us in that area, because from now on, now what we have to do is make sure the utility poles are up. So it's good to have a good working relationship.
Makes a big difference, and that comes with a lot of menschlichkeit and siyata d'shmaya. That comes. I do want to catch one thing that Rav Duvi said. Rav Duvi was talking about fixing the Eruv for Shavuos. Some people might think, wait a second, on Shavuos you can carry. The answer is on Yom Tov you're allowed to carry only letzorech, which means Hoitzah is one of the 5 halachas which is allowed on Yom Tov, but it's only allowed letzorech, which means it needs to be the need of Yom Tov. It has to be some sort of tzorech ksas. There's a discussion in halacha what that tzorech is, which means that we're used to thinking on Yom Tov you carry even if there's no Eruv. Not so simple. Are you allowed to take your talis back from shul on a Yom Tov? Not so pashut. That's not considered a tzarech. So people think it's carte blanche. It's only carte blanche because you have an Eruv on Yom Tov. If there were no Eruv, we would not be able to carry anything. We'd only be able to carry things that are the necessary specifically for Yom Tov, and that would have put the community in a lot of jeopardy. We'll take questions at the end. I want to just get 1 or 2 other points over here. When Rabbi Tights allowed the Eruv in Elizabeth, New Jersey, one of the conditions he made was that there would be one Shabbos a year, there was no Eruv, so people would not forget about the Malacha of Hoitzah. For many years, they took down the Eruv in 1 week a year, and everybody had to remember what it was like. And it took a long time for the community to rebel, and they couldn't withstand this level of Shmiras Shabbos. It became more difficult. But we always struggle. On the one hand, we're trying to give people the opportunity to build community, and the Eruv helps us. On the other hand, is you ask your average person, they have no idea about Halacha. So how do we balance the two? Is taking down the Eruv too drastic? How do we?
Imagine trying to do that in the Five Towns.
Yeah, right.
Baruch Hashem, this is a very large community. I'm sure there are multiple smachot going on every week. So who is Simcha? Are you going to tell them that they can't have their relatives carried to shul on Shabbos? It's an impossibility here. People have brought it up before, but it's Baruch Hashem. It's too large of a community with too many things going on to take it down any given week. So I would say it really falls on you, Rabbi. The education about Malacha of Hotzah, which you are right, is sorely a neglected topic most often, is definitely up to the Rabbanim to do things like this, but Malacha of Hotzah is a big thing. I remember after Sandy, when it came down, that was one thing that we scrambled to do on top of everything else. We scrambled to put together just as easy as it could be an explainer guide to email out and send out to the shuls and leave just a brief Hilchas Hotzah rundown. Here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, because many people are just left with, whoa, what goes on now?
The first time in many people's life, when I grew up, it was with key belts, The way we got back into our house, we had to have the key on as part of the belt, and that is that you got your standard Judaica store standard issue, But today it's like you ask a kid, they wouldn't even have an idea what a key belt is, And we've really grown up in such luxury. It's been It's a different world. But one of the questions that's always complicated is because, as you mentioned, there's such a gradation of shittos as to what to rely on, what not to rely on. How do on the one hand do you help create an Eruv which is encompassing most of the shittos, most of the opinions, but at the same time is also related to the reality of the complexity of the situation, where sometimes it's almost an impossible reality. Like how does one balance that when constructing an Eruv?
That's a great question. I know my rock or my guiding point that I focus on is the shemesh that I have from Rabbi Ya'akov Trump, and it's important for anyone who's involved in any klal work really to have such like a focal point. Someone, if you tried to encompass all the shittas, it would become way too messy and probably impossible. But I use the shemesh that we have from Rabbi Ya'akov Trump. We obviously forward our big shilas to him on occasion. Maybe Gedolim when we have really big shilas. His policy has always been to do the best that he possibly can. That's just his going by. Not everyone works like that. There are other poskim who will tell you that some kulas are just valid kulas and we should rely on them. And that's fair. That's their hadracha. But my hadracha from Rabbi Ya'akov has always been the guiding. There's so many kulas and leniencies involved in the creation of an Eruv to begin with. The guiding principle is you do it absolutely the best you can. So if you can be yotzei this chumrah, be yotzei the chumrah. If you can't, move on. As long as obviously there is a valid source for it in halacha. But that's our principle. We do the best that we can. We try to accommodate, make the Eruv best, and we do a great job. I think, and I know compared to many other communities, the Five Towns Eruv is on a very, very high standard in terms of halacha.
Incredible. We really so appreciative to just understand what's going on, and we our families benefit from this every single day. Just recently, the Five Towns Eruv encompassed a new area about Elbro there, which affects a lot of people. We used to do like a little sivuv, a little around that area of the golf course. People don't even realize that it was outside of the Eruv, and they worked really, really hard with the Rockaway Hunting Club to create a fence. And the fence wasn't so simple, and there's actually wires in the fence to ensure that it's actually considered lava. There's a lot of complications. So much that goes on with this, and we're so appreciative, first of all, Duvi, for everything you do, for the care behind the scenes, which nobody will ever really know fully the amount of effort that goes in. But thank you for also educating us a little bit about this. I'm going to open up for any questions, or a few questions beforehand about the Eruv. Yes, Doctor.
If you go to Brooklyn or to Manhattan, what would you do walking there on Shabbos?
I would follow the opinion of Moshe Feinstein's Zatzal. I would not carry.
It's confusing for persons living there.
It is.
Huge.
It is.
Very
Shmuel?
It's my understanding that you need the consent of all that are in or within the Eruv. How do you get that?
I assume you're referring to for the Eruv Chatzeros to be valid, that you can't have people
Correct.
be mocha.
Correct.
Yeah. So my limited understanding of the halacha is that it would require an act of macha. The Eruv is considered Chazal say a schus. That's why when we make the Eruv Chatzeros, for any of you who don't know, the Eruv Chatzeros is not related to the mechitzas that we were talking about. Eruv Chatzeros is the true where the true word Eruv comes from. And besides for the enclosure that we create to be able to carry, but we have to, for reasons we're going to not talk about right now, but Chazal required that everyone in the Rishus HaYachid, the particular Rishus HaYachid where you want to carry, everyone who is a Shabbos observant Jew has to have a communal ownership in pas and bread and lechem, which most communities use matzah, and that enables that we can see the entire Rishus as instead of being a Rishus used by the rabbim, multiple different people, it's a Rishus that everyone shares together. That is the Eruv Chatzeros that we make. And when it comes to an Eruv Chatzeros, Chazal call it a schos. That's why every Erev Pesach, when we renew the Eruv Chatzeros, we can do it without asking people, right? Zachem la'adam shalom v'vana. The Rav can acquire the Baksamas on behalf of everyone because in essence it's a schos. So the answer to the question is if someone would theoretically stand up and make a macha, for whatever reason, they would pound the table and say, I don't want to be part of this Eruv, that would constitute a problem halacha, but hasn't happened since I've been.
It's not relevant to Goyim at all.
There is a different process called Skiris Rishus, which we actually are just involved with this year. We renewed it. We renewed the Skiris Rishus with the police departments of the NYPD, the Nassau 4th Precinct, and the Lindbergh Precinct.
So just to clarify that point that Rav Duvi is identifying over here, is every single person in the Eruv needs to be contributing, so they're essentially sharing the spaces that they walk in, like the hallways, which is the roads essentially, right? So everybody's contributing, or it's contributed on their behalf towards this shared meal, which reflects the Eruv, the mixing of those communities. That works for the Jews. For the non-Jews, they need a schiras rishus, where you rent their rights of the road, so that's a joint. So there's two separate operations going on. There's the making of the Eruv, and this is beyond the mechitzos, and then there's the renting of the rishus, which goes through all the mayors, the NYPD, the NCPD, and all the different locations.
So
Just understand the complexity. That's the second step, and that has to be renewed annually as well.
Just to make the rabbi's job easier, contribute includes money.
Exactly.
No, but that's why, so you can't just put up a wire on a pole. You have to have rishus to use everything in order to do it.
No, both. Just to clarify that, to be right.
Again,
And so you need the rishus to actually make the construction, but you need also the rights of those who own the roads or police the roads to use that area as a shared space, and that's a separate.
Oh, it's
that's
separate.
Do you want to just explain that a little further?
That's exactly right. Because there are different, the Eruv Chaseris and Schiras Rishus are very different, but the Schiras Rishus, which pertains specifically to non-Jews or non-observant residents in the community. So Chazal say that in order to encourage Shomer Shabbos Yidden to live by themselves and away from, let's say, the Umas Olam, they required that no guy or no non-Jewish person be living using the space that you want to carry in on Shabbos. And that's in order to encourage us to all live together in our own area. But obviously, that's very impractical. And so Chazal themselves gave the Eitz of Schiras Rishus, that where that's not possible, where there is someone living there that's not observant or not Jewish, that you can rent from them the rights to use that space for carrying on Shabbos. That's what we call the Schiras Rishus. So obviously, in a community like the Five Towns, or any community, you can't knock on every single person's door and ask them to rent the rights to use the streets on Shabbos or their lawns. So there are a wide variety of opinions about what the best way to do this is. The opinion that we follow here, based on Rabbi Kresh's Psak, is to go to the local police departments. That's because, again, to make a long topic very brief, traditionally, maybe you would go, and we talk in the post-game of Chazal, they would go to the Duke or the government, the government that owns the land, and make the schiras from them. But nowadays in America, the Constitution kind of forbids them from throwing anyone out of their private property, which makes that a little bit more complicated la halacha. So the method we use over here is to rent from the police, because practically speaking, even if it may not be legal, if a crime were to happen or an emergency were to happen, the police obviously can and do put their caution tape, their markers, they close off areas, they have that ability. And so because they have that ability to kind of control the public domain, we rent from them.
So much goes in, you don't even realize. Yossi.
So I know, like in bungalow colonies, if you have a guy living on the grounds because he's a caretaker, so we have to take care of him as well, the same way.
To make a schiras.
Right. But what about everybody in this area who have live-in maids and things like that?
Well, they're not. I don't think live-in maids would constitute.
It would be the same.
I mean, the
as
short answer
caretaker,
is
no?
anybody who does constitute someone who's living here and owning property here would be included in the schiras rishus that we make in the police department. I'm not sure, just going to plead ignorance, if a live-in maid would constitute someone that you would need to do a schiras rishus from. Since she's living in your home, I'm not sure. She's Chazal, we're really talking about a non-Jewish person who has their own residence that uses the
You
communal
understand
space.
that?
One
So
of
meaning
the-
the police have the rights to the roads, and that's we're not interested in their houses. We're interested in the roads and the rights they have in those roads. But
The lawns.
Exactly. So the police have the rights to cordon those areas, which is why they have the right to also do the schiras rishus to us.
One other thing, because I've seen it in Borough Park, which is very strange, because I'm walking around not carrying, and I'll see them are carrying. But they also have like a bunch of goyim who even fix it on Shabbos. Is that something, I saw that happening.
The Mishnah Berurah paskins that if the Eruv comes down on Shabbos, that you can ask a non-Jew to fix the Eruv. Yeah, because the repair is only a malacha d'Rabbanan, and a mir la'akum is a d'Rabbanan, so it's a mir la'akum and d'Rabbanan l'tzarech mitzvah or l'tzarech rabbin, he calls it. that's a specific psak he does bring in the shiva.
For this whole big area, how many Eruv Chatzeros are there? I know in Far Rockaway it was always by Baguda.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question because when I first took over the Seir many years ago, I was told that every shul makes their own Eruv Chatzeros. So I don't know if that's true. I just know that the yeshiva makes an Eruv Chatzeros every year on behalf of the whole community. I don't know if other shuls do as well. I know Far Rockaway makes one Eruv Chatzeros, yeshiva makes one Eruv Chatzeros. I believe Bayswater Eruv also makes a separate Eruv Chatzeros.
So growing up in Far Rockaway, I remember, there's a few of us Far Rockaway guys. I remember the early '70s when they brought the Eruv to Far Rockaway. So growing up, we never had it, and we knew not to carry on Shabbos. And unfortunately, kids nowadays have no idea, obviously. But I remember, I seem to remember Rav Moshe Paskin, Far Rockaway Eruv was one of the better Eruvs, because it was like Far Rockaway back then was a shtetl. It wasn't like it is today. And I'm wondering if the idea of the Brooklyn Eruv, Queens Eruv, Manhattan Eruv, of not being as pashut as with the Far Rockaway Eruvs, is it a function of it possibly being a Rishus Rabbim, or is it a function of it just being a more metropolitan area?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's Rav Moshe specifically what his kind is about the Brooklyn and Manhattan Eruv is that he believes it's a Rishus Rabbim D'Oraisa. We should say the halacha is that you cannot just create Rishus Yachid anywhere you want. We have a halacha called Asi Rabbim Vatim Echitzta, which means very simply that if you have a Rishus Rabbim Min HaTorah, which they're very different, a big machlokes HaPoskim, what constitutes a Rishus Rabbim Min HaTorah. But if you have such a thing,
Even though that Manhattan is an island?
even though Manhattan's an island, yes, Rav Moshe talked about that, but that was not helpful to him. If you have a Rishus Rabbim Min HaTorah, you cannot surround it with Suris HaPesach to create the enclosure and make it Rishus HaYachid. And Rav Moshe held, I think for reasons that are beyond the scope of this year, but I'm happy to talk about it if you want, he held that that Manhattan and Brooklyn, because of their population density and a certain amount of square mileage, which he had his calculations as to how to make that, he held that those were Rishus Rabbim D'Oraisa and therefore could not have an Eruv. But for Rockaway, Kew Garden Hills, I never heard that he passed specifically about Far Rockaway, but it should be pretty simple based on his ruling that Far Rockaway would not fall into that category. I know the community he did say doesn't fall into that category was Kew Garden Hills. He felt the population density there was not too great to render it Rishus Rabbim. Certainly Far Rockaway would not fall into that
Far
category.
Rockaway was less dense than Kew Garden Hills.
Still is.
Back
Yeah.
then, still is now, yeah.
You also last question.
So for those who hold of the Eruv, let's say in Brooklyn, all the
No, back
Hasidim,
then, for
whatever,
sure,
can you partake in something that they carry for you?
I mean, if they can,
If they brought you food, like to the hospital?
this is a halachic shayla. I don't want to answer it, but I have heard that you can.
You
That
can?
if they're relying on their Rav and they do something that we don't call that Maisa Shabbos, that is my understanding of the halacha, but I'll forward that question to Rabbi Trump.
As is no game, we'll discuss it. We're going to take a moment to thank Rabbi Duvi for really just the mention of that. And there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. I hope this has been educational to ask more questions.